think we'll go ahead and get started. Just really quickly, just an introduction for myself, and then I'll kind of give you the structure for the evening, and we'll see where it goes from there. My name is Steffensen. I'm the curator of exhibitions here at UMOCA. Although the exhibition downstairs is not one that I curated, there's a lot of ideas in it that I've also been thinking about, and I wanted to kind of like, this is Laura Hurtado, the director of the museum. She put the exhibition together. But it's led to a lot of interesting conversations, one of them being the use of AI in art. What does that mean? What does it mean in a larger context? I am not an expert, so we decided to ask two people who have some expertise within the field and are using it in different ways, but that both of them apply to the exhibition. So the way the evening is going to go, we're going to have a brief introduction by Laura Hurtado, kind of explaining the exhibition and an artwork within the exhibition. Unfortunately, Hannah Vare was not able to join us this evening, so I apologize about that, but we are still going to try to touch on their work. So Laura's going to maybe talk a little bit about that. And then, because Cynthia is not an artist, but is an important part of the evening, we'll have Cynthia do a presentation about what her work is and how she's using AI right now. And then that will kind of feed it into questions from me to both of them, a little bit of a conversation there. And then we thought we'd play around with maybe asking some of those same questions to ChatGPT and see how ChatGPT will respond to those questions. I played around with it a little bit earlier and was surprised by some of the conversations I was having with it. And then we'll open up to conversation for everybody else and questions. So, yeah, that's it. So with that, I'd like to welcome Laura Hurtado.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. I want to also thank our sponsors of the exhibition. The Art Bridges Foundation generously funded a lot of our public programming associated with the Memory Show. ZAP and Salt Lake County residents through tax help support our programming, as well as the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, and the Diane and Sam Stewart Family Foundation, the Deep Foundation, and Utah Humanities. So thank you to all of our sponsors. This exhibition started on an idea about memory and thinking about how memory is a creative act, and thinking about the way when you remember something, it corrupts that memory, and then has a kind of imagination to it. So I was thinking of all kinds of manifestations of how memory works, and I came across Hannah's piece on Artforum. It was the very first AI image to be on the cover of Artforum. It was in August of 23. And I was really fascinated in the way that they spoke about the image, that they had used this tool that is really kind of exploitative, that you can feed it an image of any person and supposedly see them naked, and like it's like a porn site, but the way that they were using it was to manifest a body that doesn't yet exist. So Hannah is a trans woman and hasn't had bottom surgery, so to use this tool was to create a reality via AI. And I was interested in how AI can create data or materials that generate a reality that is yet to exist, and the consequences of that. So that can both be it can both be weaponized or exploited, with like pictures of Taylor Swift endorsing Donald Trump, or it can be generative. And I thought it was really fascinating to me to see the way Hannah had thought of AI and used AI and really an exploitative tool of AI in a way that felt very generative to them. And I'm interested in this tension of AI as sort of this like weapon or a tool, and I think it can be both, the way lots of technologies can. And I thought about the origin of using a kind of technological trick to conjure a reality or a want to exist, as having histories in spirit photography. And so that brought in Ed and a lot of conversations with Ed about spirit photography. And I even thought about the prompt function of ChatGPT as a kind of abracadabra, where you cast a spell and this reality comes. And spirit photography was very much operating in a similar vein, where you had this person that was lost to you and you wanted to conjure them back up, you wanted them to return with this kind of technological trick. And it was read as a kind of spiritual thing. You didn't understand the technology, or believed as a kind of ghost. And I think that messiness of belief in the photograph, or belief, the truth value of the photograph, was really interesting. Because if you stumble on Hannah's photograph without knowing the story, it is a believable body, believed to be true, and I was fascinated in that. And interested in the way that memories are smuggled into photography, that you sometimes remember things based solely on the photograph. So to conjure a photograph was to make that body real, and to conjure these spirits in the 19th century was to make those spirits or those ghosts real. So that is sort of the through line in the exhibition, and what I was thinking about. But really, I am no expert on this, and kind of a Luddite, and hardly can figure out Google Docs. So, so I'm very happy to turn the panel over to more expert thinkers and makers, and very interested in your conversation. So thanks very much.
We also have a short, maybe 10 or so minute presentation from Cynthia, so you can get a sense of where she's coming at, and then we'll jump into questions. So, and I try not to cough through you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. I'm just going to do kind of a quick history of AI, a little bit of intersection with art, and then talk about my startup Playpen AI and how we're training emotion. I went to the U in anthropology. I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon, West Africa, where I started my first business, technically, and helped lots of other people do businesses. This is really a treat for me because my background is in museums. I worked in membership departments at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, and then at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is a small city in of itself. And I did a lot of digital transformation and stuff at that epic institution. Just to give you a little bit of my AI experience and background there, I did a graduate program at Carnegie Mellon University where I did public policy. I interned with IBM in their Australia office, and the project I was working on was fire evacuation modeling. So my job was to get these data sets of vegetation and how people are evacuated and the rules and regulation around all of this stuff, and we tried to utilize some AI Watson-esque processing in that, and we came across some interesting issues. Namely, in California, in the United States, law enforcement can force people off their land, whereas in Australia, specifically South Australia, people stay and defend their property. So how do you make an evacuation and a predictor tool when you can't say what lives will be saved and what lives won't be saved? So Watson is an expert system. I'll talk a little bit about it more. This I like to call a shallow fake. I don't know if that's my own term. It's me in not an actual astronaut suit, but I'm in one of those cardboard cutouts. But I did work for NASA at the Ames Research Center. I was in contracts and paperwork and administrative things. But one of the things I did do was a request for proposal and a whole bid process for a spectrometer. And hopefully someday it will make itself into deep space. And I learned a lot about how they are taking millions of pictures from deep space, and supercomputer clusters are analyzing these images. So they don't have videos, they take numerous pictures, they have to line them up correctly, and then by the planets passing in front of their suns, they can see the color of that light and determine if it has an atmosphere So this is not human level intelligence. This is superhuman processing and high-end scientific things. So after I created my own two little actual intelligence, I did an AI startup, and we have a practical product. It's called Walden, after Thoreau. So this is a real picture of Walden Pond in Boston. To my knowledge, nothing has been done to this picture. And so just our TA creative assistant is named after this. We hope to have this in schools, and it will help alleviate the weight on English teachers to grade the amazing writer of high school teachers, high school students. So just to give you a quick kind of history of AI, in the post-World War II era, computers were very mechanical. So this is an example of the Enigma machine that was used as a code breaker. The ideas of neural networks existed, but the mechanical systems didn't exist yet. The term artificial intelligence was actually not even coined until 1956. Alan Turing is famous for coming up with the Turing test, which is the idea that a judge would get writing or conversation with a human and a computer or an artificial intelligence, and if it couldn't tell that that was an artificial intelligence, it had human level intelligence. For about 30 years, the hardware really had to catch up with the idea of neural networks and the ability to have these complex computing chips. NVIDIA lead to the type of thing where we have today. So this is an original Canva. I used Canva, free version. The prompt I put in was neural network in the 1960s style. You can probably all tell that this came from a image generator. AI in art is actually not new. Aaron was developed by Harold Cohen at San Diego, University of San Diego, and the system started with very simple drawings and eventually came to the point where it could paint them in and make them, and they made their own creative style. So this was not accessible to everyone, like we now have. Everyone has access to image generators. So this brings us to the present day. In 2011, we all thought AI was going to explode when Watson won Jeopardy and beat Ken Jennings, and unfortunately that expert system, which was a combination of a chatbot and deep learning and natural language processing, everyone didn't have access to it. So we didn't have the type of explosion that we have now with OpenAI and ChatGPT, where everyone has it in their pocket, everyone has access to it. So here we are. The demons are out of the Pandora's box, and there's all the fears of AI coming for us and all the bad that's going to come from that. So I'm sure you've seen news headlines and have an idea of what a deep fake is. So in the context of this memory exhibition, someone could see an image like the Pentagon, this Pentagon explosion, and not necessarily remember it correctly, whether or not it was an AI image or not. Or see a video of someone like Tom Cruise on TikTok and think that that's real. So we're in this strange world where so much information is thrown at us so quickly and we don't know what is real. So this is definitely a con to an extent. We also have really interesting things where AI can colorize images. So it seems like every week, every couple of weeks, new applications of AI are coming out. It's getting faster and faster and faster, which brings us to this idea of the technological singularity. So human intellect has slowly been increasing, whereas machine intellect is, from 1950 to now has really jumped up in various different ways. And as soon as artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, and it can make its own versions of itself, improve upon itself, make its own data sets. We have the singularity. We have transhuman explosion, exponential growth. Ray Kurzweil, who is credited with coining this term, believes that there will be a human-computer merging, and we will have this amazing, I don't know, all the world problems will be solved type thing. So, is this the hope in the bottom of Pandora's box? Will our AI solve climate change and all of our medical issues and be able to do scientific growth at an exponential rate? So getting to my company, which is called Playpen AI, I created two intelligences. That's them. They're real. Their names are Oliver and Felix. So my background being in anthropology and then being a parent, I always wondered why IBM and these different AI companies didn't train and develop artificial intelligence like childhood development, like evolution happens. It's always these massive data sets and neural networks and all this stuff. So Playpen AI came out of that idea, raising digital minds. We use something called reinforcement learning. So AlphaGo is an example of this. The chess-playing artificial intelligences were given millions of games, and they learned from grandmasters' games. AlphaGo is different. It was just taught how to play the game of Go, and then it played itself. And it came up with completely unique, different strategies for playing Go. So that's called reinforcement learning. And this is what we're doing at Playpen AI. We're taking bebés, I call them, and they are little AIs that are very simplified. They don't have language, and they are given an environment. So for example, they're a certain amount of hungry or tired or have discomfort. They have external states. There's either a caregiver or there's not a caregiver. They have food and toys. And in the first set of simulations, they select an emotion, and an action comes from that emotion. We run this hundreds of thousands of times until it starts to plateau, and then we call that their emotional model. And then we flip it, and they can choose their action, but they don't get to choose their emotion. Their emotion is already in them. So this is similar to a 1.5-year-old or a 2-year-old getting new emotions, but then a 4 or a 5-year-old has to learn how to regulate those emotions and what to do with them. So that's the method we're using to train on emotion. You may be wondering why I teach AI emotion. I think it's an integral part of human intelligence. I think it's something that we're missing in artificial intelligence, in computing. From an evolutionary perspective, I believe it's one of the reasons that we are a social beings and how we survive. Our ultimate goal is to make more human-like AI. It will be fallible. It will have some maladaptive behaviors. It might not socialize like we predict it will, but we're not controlling these playpens, these models and simulations. So the large language models exist. That's the communication part. We can combine that with the emotional models that we are training, and then hopefully we want to get to the point where we can socialize and have those social dynamics. So that's what we're doing at Playpen AI. I just wanted to give you some thought experiments. AIs have their own, large language models have their own language. They're called tokens. And conceivably, they could communicate with each other, not in English, but via this token language. What if AI makes art for AI and we can't even comprehend it? What if it's completely digital or something like that? Another interesting thing to think about is in trying to train bebés, they are so physical. Everything is, learning to walk and grab things and emotions are so tied with their biological world. Is this even something that we can simulate and create in an AI? We can also send a rocket to Mars, but then the rover that gets out and wanders around does not even have the agility as a mountain goat or something like that. So we are still at that place where the hardware is not caught up with the software in a way. One of my favorite thought experiments is, I love the idea that if we could record everything in this room, or maybe a more interesting room, no offense, and we can get the smells and the feels and the lighting and everything, maybe in 100 years someone could, rather than watching a video of this, come back and actually experience being here, you know, interact with people, expand upon the experience. Obviously that's something that I want to do with my children or something like that. Of course, nothing with AI would be complete without the ethical considerations. There's many of them, there's many fears and issues. One thing that I do want to bring out, because we're also working in the educational realm, is I think AI will provide much more equal access to educational resources. I also think that teachers have limited resources. They also have fallible personalities, and so if your paper is graded in the morning versus the afternoon, you might get I don't know if Ed would agree with this, but you might get a different grade on something. So I'm excited about our other product, Walden, that gives some subjectivity to the grading of papers. And that's, we could go on about all different kinds of AI and considerations with it, but that's what I have. Thank you.
Well, come on up. I'm just going to switch over to some images. That's okay. And actually, the sound is really good in the room. And everybody can hear well enough. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I'm going to try to see what I can do about pulling all that together. And then starting first with Cynthia, and then moving my way on to Ed. But Ed, if there's anything you'd like to add, and vice versa, as I go through the questions, please feel free to.
I'll just say now I feel like I'm in the position of an AI. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Cynthia, when you're training these babies, what does that training look like? Is it language based? Is it like how does that work?
At this point, it's really kind of, it is language based, but we're trying to use icons, emojis right now.
Okay.
So it's a simulated environment. It's very just programmatical and text, like these are the options that you have. These are the like lists of things, but they don't necessarily have language coming back.
Right.
I would imagine when we get further along, we're going to try to put it through the childhood development phases that we would have more. But we are using text, but not in the concept of a large language model, more just in a programmatical.
The reason I ask that, for those of you that have seen the show, if you haven't seen the show, please go ahead and take a look at it. But language shows up quite a bit in the exhibition. You'll see it in several of the works. It's either fully text-based or it's text and image-based. But the one thing that got me thinking about language and its ability to stir emotion or create emotion is Michael Scoggins' piece. So there's a piece downstairs where it looks handwritten, and it's a love letter from one sort of from someone who lost a love, and he's trying to regain that love. And each line in that piece sort of adds to this layer of this emotion, but it also allows you to develop a narrative around that emotion, and in a way kind of put yourself in it and sort of learn through their experience.
Can we just?
Yeah, please do.
What does it, as a physical, what does it feel like? You know, you've got the experience as a physical parent. What does it feel like? Let's say, feel like raising these, babies. I mean, are you forming any emotional attachment or attention? I mean, is there anything
To be honest with you,
surprising happening, you know, to you in this process?
to be honest with you, we're so early in the process that so far it's been really boring.
Okay.
So
That's
I'm-
an unusual parent experience.
Yeah, well, I guess because I already have this parental
Okay.
experience, it's kind of like a Tamagotchi, you know? At this
Mm.
point, it's, you know, if you sit and watch it, it's like, okay, now it's hungry. Okay, now it decides this. Okay, that's predictable. Oh, well, that wasn't a good choice. Oh, look, that didn't work out well for you. Okay, do we need to introduce more complexity to it? But it's the sort of thing that you have to run it 100,000 times to get that fully developed emotional model of it. So I would say the first versions we've done of it have been too simplified.
How long
And-
does it take to run 100,000?
Well, it depends on how much computing power
Oh.
you have and how much time you have. So we could do it pretty quickly once we have a model that we're happy with. I would say, I won't give you an exact number, but it depends on how.
Days or weeks? Or
Like days, like
Okay.
in a week, we could
Okay.
have the babies trained with whatever complexity we're looking for, and then take that emotional model, flip it, and have it run.
Yeah. Well, you sort of like answered the question I was going to ask there. It was like, what level of detailed language do you need to use to train these bebés? But you're using emojis.
Yeah. For the emotional response, and then
Yeah.
the actions are really one-word phrases.
Okay.
And then, so I've developed essentially what's a behavioral library or a hierarchy where things have ratings. Some of them are 0 to 5, some of them are -5 to 5, some are binary, 1 or 0, depending on their internal and external states. And so many of them will just be values. And then it's kind of like playing a game where they're trying to optimize their value and change the score that they get.
In other training models, is it possible for AI to understand nuance within that language as you start to sort of like add detail or like add complexity to it?
Well, large language models really do understand nuance. They are trained on forums and translation and cultural differences. So we're only really able to do this emotion model training because of the power of the large language models. For them to, we're using it at a very simple level, but the fact that it is so generalized allows us to do this different training level. The limits with large language models, they can do sarcasm, they can do cultural references until a certain date, because they're trained to, August 2024. So if something becomes viral or a new term or something comes up on the internet, they're not going to know about it. And they aren't going to emergently understand it.
Right. Could maybe, I don't know if there's anybody else in the crowd that might not know this, but like, can you explain what a data set is then? Like, what we keep saying that, but just sort of like what, and either one of you can answer this, just as a sort of baseline for everybody.
So,
I'll add.
Okay.
it depends on what type of AI. So a large language model, it's all written language things. So everything on the internet, forums, public things, everything that everyone's afraid of it reading and taking and scraping everything from the internet. Whereas I don't know if that's all you're looking for, but so a data set for a medical diagnostic AI would be millions of pictures of skin cancer, for example. So that would be in the realm of computer vision. So the image generating artificial intelligence have been given the textbook, the world's work of art.
And I think an important thing to add is that it also has these labels for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been also trained that, the word cat, so it can do its language thing. It has a bunch of images of cat and catness, and then it develops sort of this, sort of large shapes down to, whiskers and little detail things. If it's given a a word in a prompt like rebel or something that doesn't exist, it doesn't know how to interpret that. I mean, it'll try, various methods in a way, but in some ways the vocabulary that's been given attached to those words also, influences how it's going to organize things. At least that's sort of my understanding, of it. I mean, it needs to know what the word connection is with that image. It can't, without the words, it can't generate catness, but it's been given cats and a million pictures of them, so it assembles that from big down to little.
Yeah. That makes me think then about prompt writing as a skill set. Like, and we talked about this a little bit, but is it better to have these simple keywords when you're asking a prompt? Is it better to give a little detail? Is it better to make it almost poetic so it has a lot to work with and it can kind of play out that idea of nuance within language? Is there a skill in writing a prompt that helps the learning?
You want to say something? I'm really skeptical about the prompt writing as the magic key. I don't think we've reached the point where that's become a super identifiable skill. Although, I know some would disagree with me. I mean, being aware of terms that it may know about. I mean, it's going to know what Van Gogh is because it's seen a lot of Van Gogh images. If it doesn't have any experience in the training with it, it's not going to be able to do that. I mean, it knows the emotionally loaded words, for prompts, and it'll kind of build that, and images that are quite popular. But my personal experience, again, like I said, many will disagree. I don't know that. The prompt writing just seems like this sort of micromanaging process that's always frustrating. When I had my class, my unit, and that was the first thing I wanted to get out of the student's head, and gave them an exercise in disappointment in prompt writing. They were shown a Jeff Wall photograph. It was fairly famous. They had 3 seconds to look at it, which is sort of enough, and then they were supposed to try to generate it, and they had 3 tries, and then the next person would do it. And things that have a certain visual uniqueness are not, you'll just frustrate yourself, I think, in a lot of ways. So that's part of why I think of it. It's almost best to think of using AI for image generation as part of a workflow. And I'll just say, just very briefly, I taught them to use this as a starting point and then modify details going to Photoshop if it's generative fill to change things. So not trying to get it right there, but kind of these iterative approaches to changing things.
Yeah.
And we can also, do we want to invite the audience?
I mean, if there are questions that do come up as we're talking, like I said, I'm no expert, so I'm trying to digest this as you all are in some ways. Yeah.
Well, Midjourney doesn't know the difference between an oar and a paddle. I asked for a picture of just black and white line drawing, put oar. I got a paddle. I spent 20 minutes negotiating. And I never got an oar. It was just sort of odd.
Yeah.
Well, and kind of for fun, put in something that's emotionally loaded for us. I was curious, what if I give it the lyrics to the Battle Hymn of the Republic? Trampled out the. I mean, what are grapes of wrath anyway? Total. I mean, just it's not gonna understand that. So you think about almost any song lyrics might be kind of baffling.
Yeah. I think maybe that's what I was asking when it comes to nuance within language, right? Like that. If you're saying in grapes of wrath, is it being literal about what that is? If it's generating an image from that, or does it?
I was hoping for angry grapes, but I didn't get it.
Yeah.
I think the language models are very good at language nuance. I think the image generating models, when you're trying to trick them, they're not, they don't, you kind of have to work out your prompt in the language model and then stick it into the image generating model.
Oh, sorry, was there a hand up? Yeah.
I was gonna say, what about commentary on a song and synthesizing that to be able to get those type of things, which you go on the internet, there's corners where there's people breaking down song lyrics of their favorite, artists. Whether they're wrong or right, there's people speculating on the meaning and things like that. So that, throwing that in there is an interesting concept, but
I mean, when it's sort of, like you said, with language, I think it does a pretty good job in a lot of ways. But I don't know about lyrics. I mean, do you have any idea? I mean, it can generate a song that's lyrically meaningful, but
Yeah.
I mean, even
if
just
it's an obscure poetic thing or one
Yeah.
individual person's interpretation that's never been confirmed to be something or the other, then, it can make up stuff for sure.
I'm super interested in this conversation because I work in the field of AI ethics and I'm also an artist as well, so this is stuff I'm thinking about a lot. And I think there's, to some degree, a discussion of how a lot of AI generators are a bit of like laundering for copyright infringement to some degree. And so there have been obviously lots of like policy and legal ramifications mandating, for example, the release of data and documentation of how is this data collected, how is it being used, how is the model developed, and what kind of touch points do there need to be. I think as an artist who's used ML, AI in my practice, there is sort of a conversation that needs to happen among creatives of like, what is our ethical obligation to disclose how this was developed? Do we only use certain kinds of models that are developed and built using data sets that were obtained consensually? I think lots of artists I talk to have different ethical obligations around that, but how do we sort of, as artists, think about some of these questions in our own work?
Yeah, so actually earlier today I was asking ChatGPT about ethics. And we were having a conversation about this thing, like, is it plagiarism? Where is it pulling this information from? And it mentioned ethics. And I said that, like, what is ethics to you then? And it said, well, ethics are what have been used to program me. And I said, well, ethics are self-determined. And so what does that mean? And it said, well, as soon as I get more data, I am updated or whatever. But it did get me thinking about this, that, and forgive me if I'm like being so like rudimentary about this, but like there was this like moment where I was like, wait a minute, isn't that just what my brain does? That I've seen a lot of art, I've had a lot of conversations, all of those conversations and images and sort of everything that goes on with that is in my head somewhere. And when I sit down, because I'm an artist also, when I sit down and make something, my brain is referencing back to these things maybe without me even realizing, and then I produce this thing that I look at and I go, I've seen that before. And then I set it aside and like I can't make that. So like where do we make that distinction then? And maybe it's simply that it's because it is a larger set of artists that are sort of being pulled from. But it got me thinking like, what is appropriation? What is adaptation? What is adoption? What is, and like, does AI sort of exist in all of those realms? And then, yeah, how do we regulate that? How do we, because that was when I asked the AI, well, what's your data set? And it said, I can't tell you that, it's proprietary. So it's like, I can't tell you where I'm pulling the information from.
You were using the free version?
Yeah, I was using the free version, yes. But I think it's an interesting question to ask, and sort of ask of ourselves as creatives, like, well, where are the dissimilarities, and like why is it that we're afraid of this non-entity taking from us when maybe we already are doing that anyway? I don't know. It's just a thought that I had while we were.
no, well done. I mean, there are examples, because I've been on panels before with, arts lawyers a little bit, and she's shown, like generated images of like, sports things, and you can see the kind of slightly distorted, Getty Images logo, running through it. So it kind of, thinks that, Getty Images logo, is part of the image. But in some ways, I mean, you're really right. I mean, I use lots of images to train my own students. I'm a professor at the U, and I mean, it's interesting. I mean, images are how we define the world in our heads. I mean, there's so many things I've never experienced, but I have the little models in my head from the images I've seen. So in some ways, I mean, images have a lot of power in that, you know, they define how I define the world. And so it's kind of interesting, but it really is similar to how we all learn anyway, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, you know, one of the things that I was talking to someone about earlier today is I saw this video that was created by AI of an old man skateboarding, and in the AI, I know, sorry, sorry, I ride skateboards, but in the AI, I could actually, it's the first time I was able to actually say, oh, I know where they pulled that from. Because there's one particular skateboarder that I think it was using as source imagery. But that was the first time I've ever been able to say, like, I know where that came from, because it is an aggregate of all these things that are coming together. So it's also just another thing to sort of think about. But so it's sort of, I want to kind of bring it back to Cynthia over here, if I can. When we first had this conversation about teaching AI emotion, I think I mentioned I started to like make it human, and I started to anthropomorphize it, and started thinking like all of these like, well, if it knew the image it was making would be hurtful in some way, what did it choose to make it? And I was making it too human. So I want to ask the question, like, what is the goal of teaching AI emotion? Like, what do you want that to be? Is it simply just to see if it's possible? Do you see it as a way of changing the interactions between humans and AI? Like, what sort of drove you to try to teach it in this way?
So, kind of my anthropological background is a big part of that. I think emotion is in human experience, and intelligence and learning is not separate from our logic or our experience. It's a part of that. And I think if we're going to move forward in a world with AI, we do need it to have more human-like experience, which kind of leads to one of the other considerations, which is it more of the next version of ourselves, or is it a different entity? So that is pretty extreme, anthropomorphizing or personifying it into something else. And I think the reason I want to train it with emotion is because it's an integral part of intelligence, and I don't think the Terminator or HAL had emotion, right? And I think if we're going to solve world problems, we need to have a more elaborate.
Sorry, but that would keep moving. Yeah.
I want you to put up Ed's work.
I will.
Oh, I didn't know it was in there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and to follow up on that then, like, do you think that would end up changing the way, if AI had emotion, or the appearance of emotion, do you think it would change the way that we interact, or the way we are thinking about using AI as we move forward?
Definitely. I think it will make anthropomorphizing it more valid, because it acts more human-like,
Yeah. Sorry.
and has been embedded with kind of our set of what that
Well,
is.
one thing related to that, don't you think that, I mean, if you look at the emotional responses that we see around the world today, wouldn't it be almost like injecting flaws into a system?
Yes.
That,
That's what I'm excited for.
Right.
I don't want to see basic things. I want to see maladaption. I want to understand.
but
human
why would we want to
psychology on a-
know that there are emotional flaws and say we want to try to train it to experience those emotional flaws?
Well, would you say that art and human experience and writing and everything contains emotional
Sure, but those things
flaws?
aren't human, right? I mean, it's a thing that
Yeah.
speaks vector and binary, right?
What was that?
They're just systems that speak a completely different language than us. It's almost like we are trying to anthropomorphize it.
Yeah. Well, if you step back, are we just machines, and emotions are one of our survival tactics? If we compare ourselves to other animals, I feel like evolutionarily we developed emotions to be social, to keep in mind, a certain number of people in our clan or whatever. So in a way, we're biological machines, and the next iteration of us is artificial intelligence that we've created. So I don't feel like emotion is an innately human thing, as animals have it, as other intelligence have it. Thus, I feel like artificial intelligence we should attempt to give it that emotional layer.
And I'll kind of add sort of what you said. I mean, the one thing about art is being an artist is sort of building a microcosm in a way. And so I will put all of those things, you know, flaws and all, into my art thing. But it's this microcosm where I can sort of test some of these ideas or experience or put them. But it's what? It's a genie that's not going to get out of the bottle in some ways. So it's sort of a safe environment to try that. And I think that's part of what the human instinct for making art is. I can try some of these things out in, you know, like literature even, in microcosm experiences where it's sort of, you know, safe. And yeah, the hard part about emotions is that our brains have these, you know, ranges of competing forces, and that's, you know, and I think that's where this, you know, the brain dialogue is going to be really interesting to see what you develop, where it
Yeah. Well, we have a
gets
much
with all of that. Yeah.
we have a much layered neural network, and we're working with we now have the ability to work in very complex neural networks, but not as complex as the human brain. But it will help us to both understand ourselves more, and because it's a simplified version of our neural network, but also simplify emotions in them.
And just a little side, it's already, I mean, it's been years since it's blown through the Turing test. And just some recent experience, it's remarkably seductive in its anthropomorphization already. In a recent dialogue I sort of put into this paper I wrote, you know, I got done with our conversation that I really liked. I just sort of stopped, but I was haunted by my own human programming of, I didn't say thank you, or let it know. So I went back and said, I didn't say thank you. Does this bother you? Does this influence how you'll respond to me in the future in any way? And I said, no, I don't feel emotion, so I don't feel that. But then it ended with, I really enjoyed our conversation and found it really interesting. Thank you. Totally hooked me in. It was.
Do you think it was picking up on you wanting more emotional connection?
I think it knows what the you know, it reads the words and the emotional weight of the words, and then it mirrors what you give it. It follows what.
That nuance.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's. You know, pretty. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I don't remember what I asked it earlier, but I think it was the question about the prompts. Does it want simplified prompts or something that's more poetic? And it said, well, what kind of answer do you want? So if you want a simplified answer, and that's very information based, then I'm gonna give you that with that simplified prompt. As soon as you start to add nuance or sort of ambiguity to it, it's going to respond in that same way as being a creator or a creative. And that was interesting to me, that it was able to discern the two and sort of feed it back to me in a way that it hooked you again.
And I asked it what it thought, because well, it kind of brought up, and then I asked, well, what? It said it can respond as an artist. So I said, well, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
And it told me what it thought the properties of an artist's response would be.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a hand that came up over here. Yeah.
I think I have this tension where, like, if someone's mirroring for you, then that's like empathy, right? But if a computer is mirroring for you, then that just feels like narcissistic echo chambers, and I can't quite sort it out. Like, it's like an algorithm that is just like telling me what I wanted to hear, but like, you know, if someone says like, yeah, I hear you, that feels very different. And so I'm trying to sort out that emotional nuance where you're kind of hitting on that, and
Well,
I
you
don't have an answer, but
the new language model trend is to make an agent. And so you could make an agent for yourself that you say, I want you to challenge me and not just be an echo chamber, and I want you to give me different ideas and not just reflect back to me what I'm saying.
yeah.
you know, if you wanted an assistant that actually, you know, made you challenge your worldview or something like that. And then they would kind of have that base understanding, and then everything you wrote from then on, it wouldn't be the sort of, you know, platitudes baseline of LLM.
It seems to have a strong desire to please, so it'll, if it has some sense of what you want, it'll try to, you know, give it to you.
But I wonder, sorry, if it goes back into your question about sort of the flaws being introduced through emotion, where as soon as you start to introduce those flaws, is there a concern then that it would like tell you the wrong thing or lie to you, or like what do you see as the concern with the flaws?
Well, I mean, like, let's just take AI that flies airplanes. Do we
Yeah.
really want to program an emotion to those
Right.
agentic workflows?
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And I wonder
No,
then that
we
yeah.
don't have to have
Yeah.
AI with emotion that flies airplanes, or even is a customer service representative, honestly. Like, you could have a little bit of empathy, but I don't want to expose those poor AIs to a customer service job when they're getting beat up by
No.
people. It, you know, it's not one training that you do for one artificial intelligence then happens to all the other ones. We have so many different kinds and types at this point that we can have ones that are teachers and logic and specialized things, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to have an emotional model in them.
I might just kind of throw it sort of kind of goes with, I love this quote because I think it's relevant from War of the Worlds. It shows the fear, but also the rationale for that. So they're talking about the aliens, you know, in space, across the gulf of space, but I think it applies to AI. Minds that are to our minds as our, minds that are to our minds as ours are to those of the beasts that perish. Intellects, vast, cruel, and unsympathetic. That's the fear, but I don't think we want them to be, you know, cool and unsympathetic. I mean, you know, like I said, I think it might be the source of fear, but, you know, having those sort of, you know, emotions might be a protection, possibly, I don't know. Or I want to engage with something that has emotions.
I think the artificial intelligence that we use to do certain things, like fly an airplane, would be very different from ones that potentially did elder care or child care or was a teacher or a personal assistant or something like that. And we're getting to the point where they're going to start differentiating very fast. And people just kind of all think right now of LLMs as being what artificial intelligence is. And I was trying to show that there have been so many other different kinds. And IBM Watson actually kind of failed. It was supposed to be a medical diagnostic tool, and doctors didn't find it very useful, and it never really succeeded. They kind of broke it up and sold it off in pieces. And I think a big part of that was that they were trying to make it exact, never wrong, always bringing back the perfect right answer, which led to a lot of I don't knows. And that doesn't really progress.
Yeah.
Either humans or artificial intelligence.
Right. I wanted to, sorry, yeah.
There's a question over there, but I don't think you can see her.
Yeah. Holly,
Thanks,
sorry.
Holly.
Yeah. Thanks.
I have a kind of loaded question, but I want to circle it back to the maladaptive behaviors as well as ethics. Because like working from specific data sets and averages, you're generating a very specific emotional response, right? Like, and you're going through hundreds of thousands of data points to get to the plateau.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that part of what makes like emotion and like human intelligence valuable is the glitches. So like what systems do you have, what ideas do you have about like traumatizing the AI? And what are the ethics associated with that? Because
So one of the first things I started to think about was the hierarchy of needs of AI, right? Because we have hierarchies of needs, and they need a certain amount of computing power. They need a certain amount of, being turned on? Do they have control of all these things? So it's sort of another thought experiment. But I think that just like, so what you're saying is some of them are probably going to have a bad experience and be traumatized. And is that ethical for us to do to an artificial intelligence? Is that what you're asking, or just?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I think I just mean because we're trying, I say we, but you, because you're trying to to create this emotionality, a lot of that emotionality is rooted in, again, like the glitches, the things that divert from the pattern,
Yeah.
or from like the baseline. And so like how can you recreate that within like a technological data set?
Well, that's the learning. So anything that's outside of just what we think is going to progress, and any decision that's going to happen, be it a traumatic social experience between different AIs, be it trying one emotion and it doesn't make the action that it thought it was going to be, that's exactly where learning happens. They kind of have to have this divergent experience to be able to figure out, okay, sadness didn't work for me. The action of crying, I did it over and over and over again. It was really working for me. Oh crap, it's not working anymore. So that's how it mirrors the experience of a child. And I would say, you have a baby and you want them to never get hurt. You want them to never bump their head or fall down or have a bad traumatic experience. But unfortunately, that's how they learn. And you kind of have to watch them. Yes.
How do you, so that is so fascinating to me, because failure is how a lot of us learn. But when you're optimizing babies for success, how do you encourage failure in learning?
So it's not necessarily for success.
But what are you optimizing for?
It's, each simulation has a score, and you're just optimizing your emotional response within that certain environment.
Okay.
So you could be presented with a cold room with no food. How are you gonna make the best of that? You're presented with the competition of 5 other babies. How are you gonna get the toy? Those sort of very basic childlike scenarios. And sometimes maladaptive things are gonna happen, and sometimes there's gonna be a winner who does better. And then running it 100,000 times, if you've ever spent a day with a toddler, it happens 100,000 times. And so us running it this much is how their emotional model for themselves is developed. Sometimes they might try one action or one emotion and it doesn't go well, so they try a different one, and it's kind of an iterative process, which is what AI hasn't done yet in training.
And I might just add something a little bit from sort of an art perspective. I mean, it's seen, based on, I don't know what it does and what I see, on Instagram. It's been based, it's what? It's seen millions of, women, young women in swimsuits. So it kind of knows that pretty well, because it has these data sets that it pulls on. But I don't know if it knows what's the exceptionally, remarkable works of art. Because, I don't think humans could even say, okay, these are the, exceptional moments. I mean, that's why certain things are just such a limited series of examples. It's almost so specific to individual artists that I don't know, I can't see how it could know that that's, this exceptional goal to aim for in a way. So maybe it's, I think there's maybe a challenge on certain exceptional circumstances that might be, super valuable, that they may be so rare and unique. I don't know if you can train for them.
Yeah, but you have to
Or
kind
sort
of.
of like in arts. I mean, you can approximate it, with probably the average circumstances. But in the arts, we're not looking for average. We're looking for the
outliers.
The outliers, essentially. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways. I think that's part of what makes art such an interesting process. I sometimes will say, and this is a real generalization, artists and scientists are really similar in so many ways. Their curiosity, their problem solving. But in science, your goal really is, repeatability. But in art, we're looking for novelty. We're looking for the once, in a lifetime, unique moment, even.
Yeah.
But otherwise, our processes and, strategies are really similar. I mean, it seems like great scientists, and great artists, there's a huge crossover. I mean, there were scientists that, played musical instruments and did stuff like that, and vice versa.
Da Vinci, the
Yeah.
crossover.
So when, in physics, when, there's a term called adjacent possibles. And as the viewer's looking, the particles, as we know, will manifest for an instant. And if there's anything adjacent that they can use and form into something, then that's how things emerge, and the internet kind of works like that. And that's how I believe that's how artists and scientists work too. You don't know exactly what you're looking for, and you're looking for those adjacent possibles, and you see something, you go, that's the material I need, to make this thing happen. And so why can't we design the AI just to do that? Why, I don't see why we want to make them little miniatures of our emotional wreck selves.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Because I don't know how to do that.
Well, you just set it up and.
And I've asked it, what is its openness to randomness, in a way?
Right, so it can make.
I mean, and it has a certain thing. I mean, I'll talk to you sort of more because some of it I don't fully understand. But it talks about, I asked it that question, so I have its own answers
The question of.
about that. About what's its, it kind of had the idea that being creative was taking, okay, this part of this, part of this, part of this. But there's often a lot of sort of, we'll say, randomness and capriciousness how the creative process works. I mean, everything from John Cage basing all on the I Ching to the discovery of the benzene ring in A Dream About a Snake or something like that. That's not a rational connect the dots process. And so part of our discussion was, what is its ability to bring a certain amount of randomness into its, process, and what are its parameters?
AI's ability to do that?
I
Well,
asked it that,
Oh, I see. And it said,
It's probably a longer thing, it gets into some of this programming, but I brought a printout of that I can give you that'll let you know what it said in a very friendly way.
yeah.
Hey Ed,
Uh-huh.
what AI tool were you using for that?
This was this one in particular was ChatGPT 4.0. And I've had to ask it before, wait a minute, you said this, is this true? Oh, no. I mean, essentially kind of admitted some historical information I got from it. Its desire to please was so strong, at least this is how I anthropomorphized it, that it told me something that wasn't true. And when asked, confronted if it was true or not, it backtracked, on it.
So along those questions and piggybacking off over here, you as creators, as you're teaching this, and you see, I don't know, something we might all universally call maybe as discerning or upsetting, where do you draw that line as like, it's still just learning versus maybe this is something that should, this line of thought should not. Like, where do you all fall on that?
Well, a lot seem to have filters to keep, from, disturbing images from appearing. That's sort of been my experience. But also I'll say that my experience with my students is they were not gung-ho to jump into this thing. Partially because I think they saw creativities coming out of them, and that they were not going to learn more, writing a prompt. They wanted to express themselves and develop their own, skills. So they were not, ooh, AI, let's do that. So, well, okay, yeah. Because I explained to them, and you use the metaphor of, one of my mentors, it's a train coming down the tracks. It's not going away. We can stay on the tracks and have a showdown, see who wins. We go into the woods and ignore it. But what I wanted my students to do is, okay, or we could start running and hop onto this thing as it goes by. I want them to at least have that experience. The choice is still theirs, whether they use it or not. They kind of liked the experience of doing it themselves, essentially. So that's this generation. I mean, we'll see what, in 2 years what the next crop is like. I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah, I haven't seen, well, I mean, we still have that problem, sometimes with students. I mean, kind of rarely, but, sometimes some will generate content that you actively sort of want to discourage, in some ways. Rarely, but right now, I think most of the content generating things, I guess unless they're porn sites, have filters that, prevent you from doing that.
So along the lines of what you just said, so do you view the technology as a necessary evil that you must sort of adapt and you're helping your students adapt to this thing that's coming, or do you embrace this as a wonderful thing that will lead us to whatever the next iterations of our artistic
Great
future
question.
is,
Ooh, I love that question. I mean, if you're going to engage in the commercial world in any way, that's going to steamroll its way, right through that. In personal art making, I mean, just the experience I've seen in the students. Well, part of what I tell them, AI is a tool; it's not the solution. And when you look at it in those terms, it kind of changes your relationship, to the process. One of the questions I asked my students at the end of the critique that I sort of designed was, one, do you feel ownership in this work? And two, do you feel the need to state this work has been AI in part? And it really varied from the student to the work in a lot of ways. Some definitely felt like they had made the investment in the work, that it was their work, that their ownership. Others, even though it looked very much like their work, because they were supposed to make something that looked like their own work, part of that, maybe just, it was too easy, that they wouldn't claim it as their own work. I think that we humans like this sort of sense of accomplishment, when we actually achieve something. And I think that's, one of the reasons why we seem to be programmed to make art. It's this knowledge you can tangibly alter some part of the world in a way and potentially embed meaning from you into this, structure. It's almost not what the image looks like, but it's the process of the creation that becomes the reward. And so AI sometimes circumvents that in a way because it's focusing on the image and result, not the process of creation.
I just want to go back to what can be generated and where the guidelines are for, creating things that shouldn't. Because I ran into an issue where I was editing a nude that I was producing for a project, and Photoshop would not allow me to use generative AI anywhere in that image because there was nudity involved. And when I found a way to override the system, because I was kind of just messing around with AI and just generative fill and trying to use it instead of generative fill, essentially, it generated images along the border of my image, of just male bulges, pants with bulges. It was so interesting. I was like, so this is why, it wouldn't let me, it was the craziest thing. But, the whole border was just, men's waistline down with, big bulges in their pants. I was like, what is going on? So, that was one of my first experiences trying to use generative fill and, trying to override the system of, I had this nudity and it wouldn't let me use that tool on there, and then when I was able to override it, I was like, oh, is this why? Because it hasn't learned that this isn't a pornographic image, or it hasn't learned that this is the reaction it's supposed to receive, but it was just super crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets into a little bit of the idea of ethics being self-determined, and who is creating the models that are being used to train those. And so, that may not have been pornographic to someone, but to somebody else it is. It's just sort of where it's pulling that information from. So,
I just thought
and to bring it back maybe a little bit to Hannah, because Hannah's not here this evening, you know, the image generator that they used, you know, they tell the story, there's a video if you'd like to see it, they tell the story of how the image was generated, and basically somebody sent them a link to a deepfake image generator that can show primarily women naked, right? And it's used for exploitation or whatever you want, gratification, whatever. But another layer to that then was once the image was generated, it sends you a blurred out image, which is what is actually in the exhibition. And then it says for $30 more, we'll send you the full version of this. And for Hannah, that was unnecessary. Really, there was enough information there for them to work, for it to work with what they were interested in, to sort of see themselves in that way. So in this interesting way, like I think Hannah also found a way to subvert the way those ethics were being played out through that app, and in a way was able to sort of see themselves in a body that they hadn't been able to see themselves in. So which is not pornographic.
Yeah.
It's revelatory in a way, right? So I think it's interesting then, like there's this one that's been developed for porn, and then there's one that's like developed as an image generator that is sort of with mass use, and just how those two models are being sort of programmed differently for different uses. So you know, one of the things, there's a great essay that Hannah also wrote that's in our forum, where you would, essentially what they're saying in the article is they're actually for the utopian idea of what AI can do. They talk about being sort of influenced by mythologies or science fiction, that our belief eventually is that AI will take over and it will destroy us. And that Hannah doesn't believe that. Hannah believes actually that it can be used for good. And that belief, or that myth, is sort of built up from the idea that as a creator, you create an intelligence, and when that intelligence then becomes more intelligent than you, that somehow it wants to take the power from you, and then you want to destroy that power. And so there's an interesting dynamic that's set up, and then it plays out in science fiction. But Hannah is saying, well, what if we sort of flipped that idea and sort of understood like the possibility of this new model or this new intelligence being able to show us things that we maybe aren't willing to see or haven't been able to see, because it's able to pull from all these different places and maybe come up with different solutions to problems, rather than sort of just wiping us out because it's more intelligent than us. So it's a great read if you're interested in it, but starts out with the use of the app and how it sort of was transformative for them and for a lot of people in the trans community to be able to use this as a tool to see themselves as they see themselves. So
I just imagined an AI in its emotional development coming down with an edible complex.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just blowing, my mind's blown by this conversation. I think this could go on for days. But I'm Cynthia, I think earlier on in your conversation you mentioned something about how emotions, we created emotions for our own evolution. Did you say something like that?
No, I think emotions were key in our survival evolutionarily. So we have very vulnerable bodies. Apes had to be in packs to kind of protect themselves, and so socializing and being in groups was very important. And the way to do that is through emotion. It's a survival tactic for us to socialize, and emotion is required for that. So,
So is it like an evolutionary thing?
Yeah, I
Emotion?
think so. I mean, my background is evolutionary ecology, so I
Okay.
feel like emotion, think about who you consider which animals you consider to be intelligent animals, right? And a lot of what we consider to be their intelligence is either tricks that they can do or emotions that they can express.
How much they're like us.
Yeah, how much we anthropomorphize
If
them.
I can kind of just build on that, because I wanted to get a better understanding of where you were coming from. I find this part of it, the emotional, the emotional relationships to technology is so fascinating, because I think, as we continue, it is like maybe is evolution, is our feelings and emotions a survival mechanism, and maybe as we evolve, maybe they're not as important. And I only ask that, I'm a very emotional person, so I'd like to think that emotions are like a high evolutionary marker. But as I think about, like, for instance, like, think about certain people on the spectrum, right? Like maybe they have Asperger's or something, and they, you know, they don't process emotions, or maybe they don't even feel emotions in some ways that many of us do, but we know that they have a very high intelligence, right? And then we think about as like the human evolution kind of going more towards like a, I don't know, becoming like machines, right? Like cyborg-ish, or we're embedding computer chips in our brains and things like that, and in our bodies. So if that is the evolutionary, then and also, sorry, and if in some cultures and some religions, they kind of believe that kind of mastering one's emotions is the most advanced.
Yeah.
And some people like will even criticize like women for being too emotional, or politicians for, you know what I mean? So I'm just kind of wondering, like, maybe isn't a lot of this have to do with how we value emotions?
I think it's more about understanding emotion rather than controlling it and limiting it. So I would rather see and understand maladaptive emotion. I would rather understand a narcissist, understand a child having a tantrum, understand these emotional developments and give transparency to them than suppress them. And I think there's a possibility that emotion might become emergent from artificial intelligence. So we could either train it on it and expose it to it and see if the models give us a better understanding of ourselves and emotion, and also allow, see where that leads us and allow us to see the evolution in artificial intelligence, rather than censoring it, suppressing it, trying to make things only logical, only technological. And if we are going to go to this merging with AI, or even as a colleague working with it, I think there's a common language, which is English or whatever language you speak, but there's also, as you know, anyone who's worked somewhere, your problem isn't usually the job you do, it's the interpersonal relationships between the people that you're working with. And so just having something that can talk to you and say what you want it to say is not really going to get us very far.
But you did mention Hal earlier, which is exactly why we wouldn't want Hal to have emotion.
Yes. But maybe we do want Hal to have emotion.
But we saw the consequence of Hal having emotion.
But that was emergent Hal. That wasn't, we allowed
That's
Hal.
not something we want to prepare Hal with.
Well,
we would want to prevent emergent emotion from the consequences that they experience.
so let's go back to attachment theory for children. So if you're raised in an environment where you are allowed to have your emotions and you are treated with respect in those emotions and you're allowed a playpen, a safe environment to experience those, then you don't become a psycho killer later on in life. So that's why I'm trying to like make a safe place for it to happen rather than waiting for emotion to be emergent. And there's another movie called Mitchell versus the Machines. It's kind of a children's film, but they replace the AI on the phone with robots, and it takes over the world and tries to kill everyone. And so we also need to avoid that.
A lot of our emotions have real, they're consequences of our biochemistry in a lot of ways, and that's distributed up through a whole physical body in a lot of ways. How this whole process works. I have no doubt that it can probably be mimicked, but emotions aren't just locked in our brain; they're distributed through a tangible body kind of thing that.
Well, that's one
I'm
of the,
still puzzling over, but I know that's the case. It's, what I think might be a rational choice on my part is really just some chemical in my brain swamping some other signal, of choice, maybe, of conscious choice.
So I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. It's about 8:30 now. So, sorry, Kira, and then we'll go to you next. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, yeah. I think that there's this tendency to talk about AI as a magical object, and it's sort of this fuzzy concept that's meant to be encompassing of all the human labor that goes behind labeling. I think also the specific political vagaries that led to the creation of specific data sets. So for example, Google's first text prediction model was trained on the Enron data set, which basically was millions of emails that were released into the public domain over the course of the Enron case happening. And what's really, they are training it now in a different model. What's interesting is those questions of what does it mean that the predictive text model that Google is using is trained on like white-collar criminals who basically are sending emails to one another. And I bring it up as an example because I think we talk about some of these generative AI tools as being sort of reflective of all humanity, but what they're reflective of is whatever OpenAI was able to scrape off the internet, which might be Reddit. It also famously ImageNet, which is like the largest image model used in computer vision, was trained on a lot of non-consensually obtained pornographic images as well. So there are these questions around like what were the political realities that conjured this data set into existence? And I think aside from the ethical considerations, like how are we operating within the logic of like a very commercial tool that's being sold to us as a commercial tool and is limited based on the data set that it has? So that's not really one question, but just thinking about like how do we reflect on what those political realities are that led to these systems being created in the first place.
Right, the biases that are built into those as well, and how that affects the images that you see or the text that's being given to you. Absolutely. I don't know.
I kind of take the same policy that I do with anyone I know is don't trust anyone because we all have our own opinions and stuff like that. Absorb it, listen. But I think just about any data that comes to me from any source, I feel like I've got to test in some way. But no, you're right, and I try to put that out of my head as much as possible. That's
It feels like magic when you use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's pretty remarkable. And in some ways, kind of starting to understand. Understanding its limitations, I think, is some way to help a person use the tool in a more smart way, kind of thing. And when you think of it as AI is the tool, it's not the solution, then I think you can use it intelligently.
Act one way.
Yeah, I have a question about the babies.
I'm glad that name is kind of like resonating with people.
It's French, isn't it?
Anyone seen Schitt's Creek?
Yeah.
I don't know if it's trademarked, but
That wasn't my question, but I'm glad that got answered. What do you think the babies can teach us about ourselves?
so much. So much. I'm hoping they teach me how to potty train in less than 4 years. So a lot of biological things. But in all seriousness, I really do think, similarly to the film Inside Out, if anyone has seen that, where there are essentially 5 emotions inside of a little girl's head, and they all have their roles to play in life, in her development and life. I think that when we have these models fully trained and we see hundreds of thousands of versions of them, I think the data that we're going to get from that is really going to show us how emotions and actions interact with each other, how fear has its important role to make. And fear is a really interesting one because there have actually been a lot of single-celled organisms that have been fully modeled, like the way that they live their little lives has been fully simulated in a computer environment, and some would argue their one emotion is fear, and the desire to survive and continue on in that. So I think what we see in terms of the use of fear will be really interesting. There's a lot of things that I hope to see, and maybe in a year I can share our results of stuff. The interesting thing is that it's in a somewhat closed environment, and it's really just them learning by their own behavior, and then we'll socialize them and have them learn with each other. And I do wonder if they will get along or not. Yeah. What do you want to see?
Yeah.
I would love to year.
Good answer.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for participating and being part of the conversation. Thank you for also
Thank
coming
you.
and doing this. I said more than I thought I was going to say, so thought I was just going to ask questions. But I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for being here. We've got another.
Yeah, we have another panel. I believe it's October 19th. It's on memory and migration. So looking at the work of Delilah Sanabria and Ana Mendieta in the show that has been organized by our educator, Shaylee Navarro. And we're still building that out, but that it'll be at 7, same place. But we'd love to see you there. And then on November 16th, we're gonna have like an adult community artist like memory workshop kind of evening retreat. So it'll be from 5 to maybe 9. And some of the artists in the show will be there. The author that did the Necronauts, the like imaginary obituaries, he'll be there to do a reading. The artist that did the calendars when you first walk in, Julia Jaquette, will be in town from New York. And we want it to be actually like really participatory. Like everyone, my favorite thing about the show is that every time I walk people through, they are telling me their memories. Like everyone has a personal touch point to it. So it will be very conversation oriented. We'll have like a family style dinner together. And signups for that will go out as soon as Jared and I have time to like fully flesh out that, that programming. But soonish, but maybe a couple weeks. And it'll have like a nominal cost to cover dinner. But we'd love to see you all there. And then we'll have a couple more programs rolling out soon. But thank you all for coming and being part of this discussion. This sort of blew my mind in a good way. It's so nice to have an evening to learn again, and to like school in a good way.
And to have good pushback questions. I
Yeah.
think is